blades and squeeze my elbows back behind. Distributed weight between the big toe, pinky toe, and we want to hinge the hips back slightly. That screw my feet into the ground. See what that does. Breathe in here. Today's all about the back squat. We're going to go over 5 tips that will help you dial in this movement. We're first going to cover how to set the bar up properly. So it's very important that we brace our back correctly as we get set up underneath the bar. First thing we want to do is set up our hands as close as our shoulders will allow us. So hands are close. I pull myself underneath the bar. The bar sits on top of my traps. Now this is often missed here. What I want to do is I want to pinch my shoulder blades and squeeze my elbows back behind me, just like this. So not lazy here. I want the whole backside to be active. So pinch the shoulder blades, elbows back. That's going to tighten up the whole backside. The tighter our back muscles are, the more stable we're going to be. Next, we're going to cover what the foot should be doing and what it should look like while we're squatting. So feet are about shoulder width, toes are slightly pointed out or turned out. What I want to focus on here, though, is what we call the tripod foot. So tripod foot is equal weight distributed between the big toe, the pinky toe, and the heel. Most common thing that we see here is not enough weight into the pinky side of the foot. That leads to the foot collapsing in, the knees follow, it messes the hips up as well. So if our feet are not set correctly, we're not going to have a very good squat. It's important to keep evenly distributed weight between the big toe, pinky toe, and the heel. So rather than here, I'm going to put more weight into my pinky toe, okay? And I want to think about grabbing the ground with my foot. That will give me a stable contact with the ground the whole way through. Next, we're going to go over the first movement of the squat, which is a hip hinge. Okay, so the hip hinge is a very subtle movement. It's not a big movement here, but this is super important. This helps us create space to sit down into and for our pelvis to sit into, okay? So common mistake when people are squatting is a lot of times when they're here, they bend their knees first, which leads to them running out of room very quickly. Heels will start come up. Squat is no good, okay? So instead of bending our knees first, the first movement should be a hip hinge. So all it is a slight movement back with my hips that creates space for me to be able to sit down into, okay? So rather than bending the knees first and running into all types of problems here, we want to hinge the hips back slightly. That creates space for me to sit down into and get into a much lower squat. So with the bar, it'll look like this. Slight hinge in the hips, and then squat down. Next, we'll go over how to open the hips up while we're squatting. Okay, this is a small detail, but very important. It will help you get a much more comfortable lower squat. Okay, so think about our tripod foot. We got the bar set up correctly on our back. Okay, we hinge our hips back, and then we squat down without thinking about what we're doing with our hips or our thighs, our femurs, right? And a lot of times that will lead to the knees coming in, just like this. Okay, so important detail. After we hinge the hips back, I want to think about opening my hips up, my thighs up. Okay, I'll use the cue of screwing your feet into the ground, and all that's meant to do is create this movement here. Okay, again, one more time. I hinge, I want to screw my feet into the ground, see what that does to my thighs. Rather than my knees pointing straight forward, my knees are now pointing to where my toes are pointing, and that, again, gives me space to help my pelvis sit down into. So with the bar, it'll look like this. I hinge my hips back. As I squat, I screw my feet into the ground. I open my hips up, get into a low, comfortable squat, stand back up. Next, we're going to cover how to breathe and brace properly. This is very important, especially as you start adding more and more weight to the bar. Okay, so first things first, we want to start with a full exhale or close to a full exhale. So I breathe all the way out. And when I breathe in, I want to think about breathing into my torso in a way that expands not just the front side of my core, but the full core, okay? The front, the sides, as well as the back. So I like to put my hands here, okay? You breathe all the way out. When you breathe in here, I'm expanding into my hands. I don't just want to breathe into my stomach and brace my core, but I want to expand into my hands, which leads to the whole core expanding and ultimately increases the pressure that you have in your core, which is going to protect the lower back, keep you more stable, and make it much easier to squat heavier weight. Another important idea here when we're breathing and bracing We breathe all the way out. We breathe in a way that expands our torso. But then we want to think about keeping our ribs stacked on top of our pelvis, okay? A lot of times people will breathe in, they'll brace, and then as they squat, they start to tilt their pelvis forward, right? They start to get into this, okay? So an arched lower back. Guys, we just lost a lot of pressure in our core. So rather than poking the hips out or poking the butt out and tilting the pelvis forward, we want to think about keeping the ribs stacked on top of the pelvis. So again, breathe all the way out. Breathe in a way that expands the core. And then I want to keep this positioning here the whole time. Okay, my ribs are stacked on top of my pelvis the whole time. Okay, so with the bar, I'll get set up here, show what it looks like, tight back, walk out, set my feet. Now from here, again, I want to breathe all the way out. Breathe in a way that's going to expand my whole core. I hold that breath, okay, and I'm keeping my ribs stacked on top of my pelvis. So out, in, hold and squeeze, engage the whole core, reach the hips back, open the hips up, okay? In an ideal world, I'm still holding the breath until I'm about halfway up. So a good cue or a good thing to think here is think about holding your breath as if you were squatting in chest high water, okay? So again, breathe out, breathe in, big breath. I hold and brace here. I'm still bracing until I'm about halfway up. My head is now above that chest high water. And then you breathe out. Okay, so quick review over the 5 things that we went over. First was setting the bar properly on the back, pinching the shoulder blades, pulling the elbows back to engage the whole back side. Second was talked about our tripod foot, right? Equal weight distributed between our big toe, our pinky toe, and our heel. Third was the hip hinge. Your squat, every time you squat, should start with a slight hip hinge, okay? Fourth, we went over how to open the hips up, screwing the feet into the ground, right? So as we hinge our hips back, we screw the feet into the ground, we open the hips up. That gives us space for our pelvis to sit into. And fifth, we covered how to breathe properly and brace, which is very important, especially as you add weight to the bar. Thank you guys for hanging out today. As always, if you found anything useful or if you liked the video, please like the video, throw me a subscribe. If you want any other movement tutorials and anything that you've seen in the weight room or want to see in the weight room, please leave those ideas down in the comments and we'll see you in the next one.